Our story begins in the heart of the Midwest, a place where endless skies meet an ocean of corn. Here, a lone farmhouse stood surrounded by miles and miles of dense, tall cornfields. It was a peaceful, isolated existence, the kind of quiet that can feel comforting, or, if you listen too closely, deeply unsettling. That summer, the crows were particularly relentless, a black plague descending upon the season's crops. The grandfather, a man of practical solutions and few words, decided to take action. He constructed a new scarecrow. It wasn't anything fancy, just a crude figure made from a pair of his old worn-out overalls and a burlap sack for a head, stuffed to the brim with dry, brittle straw. He mounted this effigy on a heavy wooden stake and drove it deep into the earth, about 50 rows out into the cornfield. A silent guardian, its button eyes staring blankly at the farmhouse. The youngest child of the family, a boy named Leo, was prone to boredom. With no other kids for miles, the vast cornfield became his playground and his prison. He'd spend his long, sun-drenched days sitting on the worn wooden planks of the front porch, the rhythmic creak of his rocking chair the only sound. To pass the time, he developed a simple game. He would count the rows of corn between the house and the new scarecrow. 50 rows. It was a fixed number, a constant in his unchanging world. 50 rows of green stalks, separating his home from the straw-filled man. He'd count them every morning, a small ritual to start his day. The number never changed. It was always 50. For a while, on Monday, the count was 50, just as it had been. But on Tuesday morning, as Leo sat on the porch, he counted again. 1, 2, 3. He squinted, his brow furrowed in concentration. 38, 39, 40. He stopped. 40. That couldn't be right. He must have miscounted. He started over, slower this time, pointing with his finger at each row. Still 40. The scarecrow was 10 rows closer. He ran inside, his voice a high-pitched burst of excitement and confusion. "Mom, Dad." The scarecrow moved. His parents exchanged a tired, knowing glance. His father ruffled his hair and said, "Leo, it's just a scarecrow. The wind probably knocked it forward a bit. Don't let your imagination run away with you," his mother added. "Or maybe you just need to clean your glasses." "Sweetie," they dismissed it as childish fantasy, the product of a bored and overactive mind. Leo wasn't convinced. He knew what he saw. He counted again that evening. Still 40. On Wednesday, he woke up with a knot of anticipation in his stomach. He rushed to the porch before breakfast, his bare feet cold against the wood. He counted 30. It was 30 rows away. The knot in his stomach tightened into a cold fist of dread. He didn't tell his parents this time. He knew they wouldn't believe him. They would just tell him to stop playing silly games. But this wasn't a game anymore. Something was wrong. The scarecrow wasn't just leaning. It was closer, much closer. By Thursday morning, the figure stood a mere 20 rows from the house. Its presence was no longer a distant feature of the landscape. It was an encroaching threat. Its sackcloth face seemed to loom larger, its stitched-on smile more like a sneer. And that's when Leo noticed the most terrifying detail of all. He stared at the base of the scarecrow, his eyes tracing the wooden stake it was mounted on. It wasn't leaning. The stake was driven perfectly upright, deep into the dark soil. The scarecrow wasn't walking or stumbling through the corn. The ground around it wasn't disturbed, save for a single, deep hole where the stake had been pulled out, and a new one where it was replanted. Someone, or something, was coming out into the field every single night, pulling the heavy stake from the ground and moving it 10 rows closer to their home. The cold dread Leo felt turned into pure, unadulterated fear. The scarecrow wasn't the one moving. It was being moved. It was being brought to them. That night, the sky turned a bruised, ugly purple. The air grew heavy and thick, charged with an energy that made the hairs on Leo's arms stand on end. Then the storm broke. It was a violent, biblical tempest. Rain hammered against the roof like 1,000 tiny fists, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. The first crack of thunder was so loud it shook the very foundations of the old farmhouse. And then, with a final, sputtering flicker, the power died. The house was plunged into an absolute, suffocating darkness, a blackness so complete it felt like a physical weight. The only light came in brief, blinding flashes as lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the world in stark, monochrome snapshots. Leo, unable to sleep, crept to the living room window. His heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He peered out into the torrential downpour, waiting. Another flash of lightning lit up the yard, and his breath caught in his throat. The field was empty. The scarecrow was gone. Its post, 20 rows out, stood empty and stark against the thrashing corn. His blood ran cold. Where did it go? He pressed his face against the cool glass, his eyes scanning the darkness, desperately searching. Then, another bolt of lightning, brighter this time, a brilliant, spidery web across the sky, and he saw it. It was no longer in the field. It was standing directly in the center of their lawn. 10 feet from the porch, 10 feet from the front door. It stood perfectly still, unmoving against the violent wind and rain. In the strobe light flashes of lightning, Leo could see that the burlap sackcloth mask was no longer dry and light. It was dark, wet, and heavy, sagging grotesquely as if there was something solid and dense underneath the fabric, something other than straw. The button eyes seemed to stare right at him, right through the glass. Its stitched smile seemed wider, more malicious. It wasn't a scarecrow anymore. It was a sentinel, waiting. Leo let out a strangled cry, a sound that was swallowed by a deafening clap of thunder. His father, alerted by the noise, came running into the room, fumbling with a flashlight. "What is it, son? What's wrong?" Leo could only point a trembling finger at the window. It's on the lawn." His father aimed the flashlight beam out the window. There it was, caught in the weak, yellow light. A sodden, slumped figure, standing unnervingly still in the middle of their yard. The man's face went pale. The playful dismissal was gone, replaced by a primal fear. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice tight. He disappeared for a moment and returned carrying his old 12-gauge shotgun. With a look of grim determination, he took a deep breath, unlocked the front door, and threw it open, ready to confront the intruder that had been tormenting his son. The roar of the shotgun blast was deafening, momentarily overpowering the storm itself. He fired directly at the figure on the lawn. The impact was immediate and explosive, but it wasn't the sound of buckshot hitting flesh and bone. Instead, the scarecrow erupted into a cloud of dry straw and tattered rags. The old overalls and burlap sack were blown to pieces, scattering across the wet grass. The wooden stake at its core snapped in two. It was empty. There was nothing inside but straw. It had always been just straw. The family stood on the porch, staring in stunned silence at the pathetic, shredded remains of the decoy. The rain began to soften, the thunder receding into a distant rumble. The father lowered his shotgun, a look of profound confusion on his face. It was all just a prank, a sick, elaborate joke. But who would? And then they heard it. From the quiet darkness of the house behind them. A sound that did not belong to the storm. A sound that made the shotgun blast seem like a whisper. The distinct, unmistakable creak of a floorboard. From the master bedroom. Upstairs, the scarecrow was never the threat. It was the countdown. It was the diversion. It was the reason they were all staring out at the lawn. The reason the father had the shotgun. The reason the front door was now wide open and unlocked. And while they were all looking outside, something else had already gotten in. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. See you next time.